Bruno Manser was born on August 25, 1954, in Basel, Switzerland, into a life of privilege and high expectations. His family hoped he would pursue a medical career, but Bruno, a bright and independent thinker, chose a different path. At 19, he was sentenced to 3 months in prison for refusing Switzerland's compulsory military service, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's principles of nonviolence. Embracing his status as a political prisoner, Bruno left prison with a desire to lead a simple and content life. From 1973 to 1983, Bruno worked as a shepherd in the Swiss Alps, delving into handicrafts, herbology, and speleology, the study of caves. He learned to make his own bricks, bake bread, weave clothes from the wool of the sheep he tended, carve leather, and keep bees. This lifestyle satisfied him for a while, but around the age of 30, he developed a profound wanderlust. In 1984, Bruno traveled to the Malaysian state of Terengganu, where he joined an expedition to explore Gunung Mulu National Park. Here, he first heard of a nomadic tribe known as the Penan. Intrigued by their way of life, he set out to find them, despite his initial misadventure involving an unripe palm heart that left him with food poisoning. Determined, Bruno continued his search and, after many attempts, finally encountered the Penan near the headwaters of the Limbang River in May 1984. Initially cautious of the crazy orang putih, or white person, the Penan people observed Bruno from a distance. Impressed by his resilience and reassured of his good intentions, they eventually welcomed him into their villages. During his time with the Penan, Bruno mastered jungle survival skills, learned their language, and became closely acquainted with their culture. The tribe even introduced him to their leader, Chief Along Sega. Bruno joined the Penan hunters, wearing a loincloth and using a blowgun with poison darts to hunt. Although he was mocked as Tarzan in Switzerland, the Penan came to know him as Laki Penan, meaning the man, a title that conveyed great respect. Bruno survived numerous jungle dangers, from bouts of malaria to a near-fatal snake bite, and even a terrifying 24-hour ordeal hanging from a mountain ledge. After more than 15 years of traveling to the rainforests of Southeast Asia and campaigning against deforestation, Bruno had made many enemies among logging companies and politicians who disliked his accusations of corruption. By 2000, Malaysian authorities had barred him from the country, so he turned his focus toward Indonesia. In February 2000, Bruno embarked on a new journey through the Indonesian jungle with a companion and a film crew from his foundation, the Bruno Manser Fund. After weeks of trekking through rugged terrain, he reached the Sarawak-Kalimantan border on May 18th, where he wrote a postcard to his girlfriend, Charlotte, entrusting it to his companion. Bruno then continued alone. The last person to see him was a Penan friend named Palwi on May 25th, who noted that Bruno was heading toward Bukit Batu Lawi, a mountain he intended to climb. After parting ways, Bruno disappeared. As weeks passed without any sign of him, his colleagues enlisted the Penan and conducted an exhaustive search. They traced his machete cuts through the jungle and even chartered a helicopter to scour the mountain's limestone peaks. Despite their efforts, no trace of Bruno, his body, equipment, or clothing was ever found. Even skilled local guides, stumped by his disappearance, ruled out a mountaineering accident, concluding that Bruno must have left the mountain alive. As hope waned, Bruno's loved ones sought assistance from psychics, fortune-tellers, and tribal shamans, all of whom insisted he was still alive. His girlfriend, Charlotte, informed the foundation of the details in Bruno's last postcard. He had complained of diarrhea, a broken rib, and exhaustion. Yet he seemed resolute in pursuing an unnamed goal. His foundation requested an official investigation from the Swiss authorities, but their search also turned up nothing. In November 2001, Bruno was posthumously awarded the International Society for Human Rights Prize for Switzerland, and months later, hundreds of Penan gathered to honor him with a funeral ceremony called Ata Ai. They referred to him as Laki Tawang, or the one who became lost, following penal custom of not speaking the names of the recently deceased. Subsequent expeditions found no further clues, and on March 10, 2005, a Swiss civil court declared him legally dead. 5 years later, a memorial service at Basel's Elizabethan Church commemorated his life, attended by over 500 people. To them, he was no longer Tarzan or Bruno, but rather Laki Tawang, the man who gave his heart, and ultimately his life, to the jungles of Southeast Asia. Leah Roberts was born on July 23, 1976, in Durham, North Carolina. Known for her talkative and easygoing nature, Leah had a deep love for music and a thick Carolina accent. At 23, she was living comfortably in Raleigh, North Carolina, with her close friend and roommate Nicole. However, her young life had already been marked by tragedy. At 17, Leah's father was diagnosed with a chronic respiratory illness. 3 years later, her mother unexpectedly died of heart disease. Following this loss, Leah took time off from school to grieve, but upon returning in the fall of 1998, she was nearly killed in a car accident, suffering severe injuries that required a metal rod in her leg. Then, in 1999, her father passed away in his sleep. During this period, Leah became increasingly interested in philosophy and spirituality, and these passions ultimately eclipsed her desire to complete her degree. Although she returned to college in the fall of 1999, she spent more time on her new interests than her studies. Shortly before her expected graduation, Leah dropped out, choosing to embrace life fully and pursue her love for travel. On March 9, 2000, Leah spoke with her sister, Kara, and made plans to babysit together the next day. However, that night, she packed her belongings, took her cat, Bee, and embarked on a solo road trip across the United States. When Leah failed to show up for babysitting, Kara assumed her sister had simply changed plans. But when Leah was unreachable for several days, Kara visited her apartment and found an envelope labeled, "Read Me." Inside was $3,000 in cash, along with a note to Nicole covering bills during her absence. Leah's note concluded with instructions and reassurances, stating that she was not sad, but rather hopeful. Leah's passion for Jack Kerouac, particularly his book Dharma Bums, inspired her journey. Using her power of attorney, Kara obtained Leah's bank records, which traced her movements westward, following a route similar to Kerouac's own. Detectives may have unknowingly spoken to someone with close knowledge of Leah's whereabouts who may have been intentionally misleading them. On March 21, 2000, Leah's siblings, Heath and Kara, traveled to Washington State to join the search for her. Their first stop was Bellis Fair Mall, where Leah had watched a screening of American Beauty, hoping someone might recall her. Although no one at the theater recognized her, staff at the restaurant Elephant and Castle reported seeing Leah on March 13th, cheerfully chatting with patrons at the bar. After Heath and Kara returned to North Carolina, a man who had spoken with Leah that night contacted the detectives. Though he remains anonymous, he described Leah as friendly and engaging, but said he saw her leave alone. Later, detectives found another patron who also described Leah as warm and talkative. This patron recounted discussing her admiration for Jack Kerouac and how he inspired her visit to Washington. However, unlike the first account, this second witness claimed Leah had left with a man she called Barry. His description of Barry was so detailed that investigators had a composite sketch made, naming Barry as a primary person of interest. Yet detectives were never able to confirm Barry's existence and found it suspicious that the stories contradicted each other. When pressed, the second witness behaved oddly, raising doubts that Barry was real and suggesting he might have invented the story to mislead the investigation. After searching Leah's car, detectives asked Kara what they should do with it, and she chose to let them keep it, hoping that advances in technology could uncover new evidence. In 2006, her foresight paid off when detectives Jamie Collins and Alan Smith reviewed the case files. They realized the Jeep had not been thoroughly searched, particularly under the hood. Upon inspection, They discovered the cover had been removed from the starter relay, allowing someone to start the Jeep and accelerate it into an embankment without a driver inside. Unidentified fingerprints were also found under the hood, suggesting tampering by someone with mechanical knowledge. One person of interest with such skills was the second patron from the bar, who had since moved to Canada. He had a military background and extensive experience as an auto mechanic. It took 2 years for Canadian authorities to provide his fingerprints, only to find they did not match those found on Leah's Jeep. In spring 2010, authorities obtained a DNA sample from an undisclosed item in her car and began comparing it to the person of interest in 2011, but the results remain unknown, with no further public updates on the case. Leah's missing person posters, once prominent across Washington, are now faded and torn, her smile a faint memory for those who loved her. Though the search has stalled, her loved ones hold on to a fragile hope, vowing never to give up until they bring Leah home. On the morning of June 25, 1983, the Marshall family set out for Montana's Elkhorn Mountains, where Kim Marshall, a member of the Capital City Radio Club, had been invited to a ham radio operator's picnic in Helena National Forest. The day was bright and clear, a perfect summer Saturday. With Kim was his 4-year-old stepdaughter, Nylene K. Marshall, a joyful preschooler close to her 5th birthday. Only Kim and Nylene attended the picnic, but upon arrival, Nylene spotted other children playing by Mopan Creek, a shallow stream. She asked Kim if she could join them, but he hesitated to let her play without supervision. Just then, a 13-year-old girl approached Kim, offering to watch over Nylene and teach her how to catch frogs with the other kids. Grateful, Kim accepted the offer, instructing Nylene to stay with the girl while he went to greet his friends, trusting that the teenager would watch over his young stepdaughter. However, he was unaware of the events that would soon unfold. Upon returning to Mopan Creek, Kim discovered that his 4-year-old stepdaughter, Nylene, had gone missing. The 13-year-old tasked with watching Nylene admitted she'd told her to stay by the creek and focus on catching frogs, but hadn't noticed when she wandered off. Casual concern quickly became panic as Kim and other picnic attendees began searching for Nylene. The situation grew more dire as Kim realized the surrounding area was treacherous, with thick forests, steep cliffs, and abandoned mine shafts. To Kim's horror, a group of girls mentioned seeing Nylene speaking to a man in a purple jogging suit who invited them to play a shadow game. The older children refused, but little Nylene seemed to have trusted the man. After filing a missing persons report, a large-scale search commenced, with search teams covering nearly 1,000 square miles and employing helicopters, heat-seeking equipment, and specialist canine units. One dog tracking Nylene's scent stopped abruptly near the creek, suggesting she may have been taken suddenly. Search efforts intensified until harsh weather conditions forced a suspension. After 10 days, officials called off the search, though some volunteers continued, driven by hope. Months passed with no solid leads. However, over 2 years later, an anonymous caller claimed responsibility for Nylene's abduction. This man sent letters to authorities, describing how he'd raised Nylene under a different name, taught her at home, and traveled with her. Although his claims initially seemed far-fetched, his knowledge of unpublished details convinced law enforcement he was genuine. His letters grew disturbing, hinting at possible abuse, but attempts to trace him failed. Sporadic sightings and phone calls continued, but none led to Nylene. In 1991, a Montana man, Richard James Wilson, confessed to abducting and killing Nylene, but inconsistencies in his account led police to doubt him, and he was later released due to lack of evidence. The search resumed, and the mystery continued to haunt Kim and his family. In 1995, the Marshalls relocated to Mexico, but during a scouting trip, Kim's wife, Nancy, died mysteriously. Although initially deemed natural, private investigations suggested she was bound, gagged, and likely murdered, yet Mexican authorities were reluctant to investigate further. Torn between justice and laying her to rest, Kim ultimately chose to bring her body home. Around the time of Nancy's burial, a New Orleans nurse encountered a young woman named Helena, who, in a confidential moment, admitted to feeling uncertain about her past, wondering if her mother had once been named Nylene. But when questioned further, the man with her returned, preventing any deeper inquiry.